What if I told you that your greatest advantage in life might not be your intelligence or your skill or your charm, but rather your ability to stay silent when everything inside you screams to speak? What if the real currency of power isn't volume but restraint, not assertion but presence? Imagine that in the noise of the world, in the endless debates, the constant proving, the desperate performances, the real authority belongs to the one who knows when not to speak, because he understands that silence is not emptiness. Its presence distilled, its gravity in its purest form. There exists a sacred strength in the person who doesn't need to fill space with words, who knows that the air between thoughts, the pause before a reply, the gaze that listens longer than it speaks, that is where influence lives. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." But what do we waste more than our words? How often do we speak not to connect but to defend, not to understand but to impress? And what are we really defending when we speak too soon, when we over-explain, when we rush to justify? Is it our ego, our image, our fragile craving to be seen, to be understood, to be right? But Carl Jung warned that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. And so it is with our words. Most of them are not chosen. They are habits, echoes of old insecurities, projections of unexamined fears. What are you really chasing when you walk into a room and feel the need to announce yourself, when you jump into conversations, when you overlap, when you overshare? Is it connection or is it invisibility cloaked in noise? Because the Stoics understood that the quieter you become, the more you can hear not just others but yourself. The world speaks to those who listen, but most of us are too busy talking, too busy performing to hear it. Imagine walking into a room where the air shifts, not because you said anything, but because you didn't, because your energy, your stillness carried a weight, a sacred discomfort that made others pause, wondering who you are and why they feel your presence more than your words. Imagine possessing that kind of gravity, the gravity of stillness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the universe is change, life is opinion, yet how often do we forget that our opinions, our need to correct, to debate, to be right, are nothing more than noise in a world that does reward truth but performance. But the one who knows when to withhold, when to observe, when to let others fill the space with their noise, he holds the real power, not because he dominates, but because he listens, because he discerns in the silent spaces between desire and power. There is a tension, a sacred tension, between who you are and who you pretend to be, between the urge to be seen and the strength to in unseen. And it is in that discomfort that character is built, that presence is formed, not in the loudness of your voice, but in the clarity of your mind. Plato taught that wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something. So ask yourself, when was the last time your words carried weight because they were necessary, not because you were uncomfortable with the silence? What does it feel like to sit in silence, to feel the urge to speak rising like a wave, and then letting it pass? What does it reveal about you? What are you afraid will be lost if you say nothing? What does your discomfort with silence say about your need to be validated? Imagine this scenario: you're in a negotiation or a confrontation, and instead of reacting, instead of filling the space with justifications or defenses, you wait, you watch, you listen. In that stillness, your opponent reveals themselves, their fears, their desires, their weaknesses, because silence is a mirror, and most people can't bear to see their reflection in it. The Stoics taught that self-mastery begins with self-observation. And how can you observe if you never stop talking? How can you understand yourself if you're constantly performing for others? Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." But what if the person who improves you most is the one who teaches you the power of restraint, the value of saying nothing when your ego wants to scream? There is a sacred paradox here. To speak to others' ego, you must silence your own, because the ego is loud, it's I am patient, it's reactive, but presence is quiet. It waits, it watches, it responds. Only when the words are worthy of the moment. You do not need to prove yourself to everyone, every time. Sometimes the most commanding thing you can do is to remain still, to let others exhaust themselves trying to decipher your silence, because silence is not absence, it is not weakness. It is the ultimate form of control, the control of yourself, of your impulses, of your need to be heard, to be seen, to be validated. And in mastering that control, in wielding that sacred stillness, you do not just influence the room, you become the room, you become the gravity that others orbit around. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it, because in that embodiment, in that disciplined silence, you remind people of a deeper truth, one that words often conceal, that presence is not what you project, it is what you preserve. It is the energy you guard, the peace you protect, the restraint you practice. Presence is built in those moments when you could speak but choose not to, when you could correct but choose patience, when you could perform but choose peace. Carl Jung said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul, and yet, when you choose silence, you force yourself to meet that soul, to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood, of being invisible, of being unseen, and in that discomfort you find that you do not disappear, you do not dissolve, you expand, you deepen, you become the man who speaks less is not a mystery, because he hides, but because he carries too much depth for casual conversation. He does not fear being forgotten because he knows that gravity never needs to add. Virtus itself, Plato taught that the measure of a man is what he does with power, but I would add that the measure of a man is also what he does with his silence, because silence is power unspoken, power unprovoked, power that does not need a stage to be seen. Imagine living your life as a presence that others feel before you speak. Imagine your reputation being built not on what you say, but on how you listen, on how you observe, on how you move through the world without the need for noise, because in a world where everyone is shouting, the one who listens stands out. In a culture addicted to exposure, the one who holds back becomes desirable. In a landscape flooded with opinions, the one who waits, the one who watches, the one who responds instead of reacts, that man commands not by volume, but by value. Ask yourself, where in your life are you leaking power through unnecessary words? Where are you over-explaining, over-sharing, over-justifying? And what would it look like to reclaim that power, to hold your peace, not just as silence, but as strategy? There is a gravity in stillness, a sacred influence that draws the world to you without you having to reach for it. But to access it, you must train your mind to be still, to be patient, to be intentional, because every word you speak is a withdrawal from your energy reserve. And the man who conserves his energy, who speaks only when the words add weight, not noise, that man becomes unforgettable. So I ask you again, what are you really chasing when you speak too soon, when you react too fast, when you explain too much? And who could you become if you trained yourself to wait, to watch, to withhold? Because in a world of noise, stillness becomes unforgettable.